For heirs of Custer and Sitting Bull, a 150-year-old battle is still personal. This week, crowds are gathering at the Little Bighorn Battlefield National Monument in southeastern Montana, where the Little Bighorn River winds through grassy hills, the same hills where, on June 25, 1876, Lieutenant Colonel George Armstrong Custer and all of his men died during an attack on a Native American encampment. 150 years later, two descendants of the men on opposite sides of that battle are still living in its shadow. Ernie LaPointe is 77 years old and the great-grandson of Sitting Bull, the storied Hunkpapa Lakota leader who helped guide the resistance against the U.S. government's seizure of the Great Plains. Growing up in South Dakota, LaPointe's mother told him to keep quiet about who he was. If the neighbors found out, she said, he'd never have a normal childhood. He stayed silent until the early 1990s, when an aunt told him it was time to come out from the shadows. Since then, he has made it his mission to protect his great-grandfather's legacy. "The blood of my great-grandfather is in me," LaPointe said. He cared for the people, he cared for everything. He even cared for the people who tried to kill him. More than 1,000 miles away, in Arizona, Chip Custer never had the option of hiding his identity. He was born George Armstrong Custer IV, the great-great-grandnephew of the famous lieutenant colonel. After his father died suddenly in 1991, Chip, now 70, inherited the role of keeper of a legacy that is, to put it mildly, complicated. Custer is among the most lionized and vilified figures in American history. Chip has long been familiar with the criticism of his relatives' devastating offensive against the Cheyenne, of his military tactics, of his ego. He hopes people will try to see Custer in full and in context. "If someone wrote 1,000 stories about me," he said, "what would I end up looking like after all that time under the microscope?" Chip first visited the battlefield in 1976 for the centennial, as a 21-year-old with no particular interest in family history. He drove up to surprise his father, a retired Army officer. As they sat through a ceremony near what's known as Last Stand Hill, the American Indian Movement leader Russell Means spoke out to celebrate the cavalry's defeat. Chip's father was incensed. That, Chip said, was his introduction to what this place means to different people. Back then, the site was still called Custer Battlefield National Monument, and it told a narrow story. White marble headstones dotted the prairie to mark where soldiers fell, but nothing marked the deaths of the 60 to 100 Native Americans estimated to have died that same day. In 1991, Congress renamed it the Little Bighorn Battlefield National Monument, just months after Chip's father died, a man who had opposed the name change. The renaming reflected a broader shift. To the Lakota, Northern Cheyenne, and other tribes, this ground is hallowed, a place of great triumph over a government that sought to suppress their way of life. The two men have approached their shared inheritance differently. Chip has written about Custer's time at West Point and his celebrated Civil War record, spoken to groups of Custer enthusiasts, and in 2021 successfully argued against removing a Custer statue in Monroe, Michigan. He believes his relative shoulders real blame for the outcome of that final battle, but pushes back on reducing a man's life to its last day. LaPointe, meanwhile, has spent years defending not just Sitting Bull's memory, but his own right to claim it, including a Smithsonian review in the mid-2000s that ultimately confirmed his lineage and returned to him a braid of Sitting Bull's hair and a pair of wool leggings. Sitting Bull himself was killed in 1890 on the Standing Rock Indian Reservation, shot during a botched arrest ordered by U.S. officials, part of the government's escalating campaign to force Native Americans onto reservations in the years after the Little Bighorn. The battle was a military victory, but the larger struggle was not. This week, there will be reenactments, ceremonies, and the opening of a new visitor center in the months ahead. The two descendants will be there, as students of the battle and as something more, as men whose identities are inseparable from a single day, 150 years ago. That's the story of the Little Bighorn and of the families still living inside it.